Hey guys, tonight we step inside a world that isn't quite what you think. A world of gleaming swords and silent codes, of shadowed honor and endless bowing, but also of tedium, awkward rules, and the unbearable weight of looking impressive while doing absolutely nothing. This is the secret life of the samurai, not in the thrill of the battlefield, but in the long, rainy hours that followed. So lie back, breathe slow, and get ready to wander through the quiet frustrations of the warrior elite. If this sleepy scroll through the past brought you peace, a like and a sub would mean a lot. No strings attached, unsubscribe anytime. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, let us know your location and the time down in the comments. We'd love to hear how you're doing. Now close your eyes and listen. Somewhere in the dark, footsteps fall. You're the one making them. Your armor's soaked through. It started raining 2 hours ago, and there's still half a patrol left to walk. You adjust your grip on your spear, more out of habit than need. Nobody's around. Nobody's ever around. The castle gates haven't been threatened in decades. The last major battle was years before you were even born. Still, you trudge on. The rain clinks softly on your helmet. Your sandals squish. This is what they never told you. Being a samurai in peacetime means a lot of standing around. You're not charging through fields or defending walls. You're checking alleyways, bowing to half-drunk nobles, and escorting lost children back to their courtyards. It's not glorious. It's not terrifying. It's just damp. The torch you're carrying hisses when a drop of water hits the flame. You're supposed to carry it upright and confidently, like a real protector of the peace. But your wrist hurts from the weight, and the oil smoke keeps curling into your nose. You cough and immediately feel embarrassed. A real samurai wouldn't cough. A real samurai would probably die stoically from oil inhalation before coughing. You round a corner. There's a merchant's assistant rolling up a mat, probably closing early to avoid getting caught in the flood. He glances at you, doesn't bow. You notice, you always notice, he's not afraid of you. Not like in the stories, not like your grandfather remembers. You flash back to that day in the courtyard, your first inspection. You wore your family's armor, polished it until the gold edging reflected the clouds. Your knees wobbled. Your commanding officer asked your name, and when you bowed, your helmet slipped forward and bonked him lightly on the forehead. He didn't yell, just said, "Tighten your chin strap, please," with the kind of disappointment that could bruise a soul. Since then, you've learned how to walk without clanking. You've memorized your patrol routes. You've practiced your silent glare in the river's reflection. But it doesn't matter, not really, because no one actually expects you to fight. See, Japan's in a weird place right now. The Tokugawa shogunate runs a tight ship. The country's sealed off. Peace, for the most part, is enforced with an iron kimono. So what do you do with thousands of warriors trained to kill? You tell them to guard things. You assign them to temple watch duty. You have them inspect storage buildings for fire hazards. You make them play city cop, social monitor, etiquette enforcer, and unpaid mascot for traditional values. It's like hiring a lion to sort scrolls. Sure, there are still duels now and then, but they're rare, mostly discouraged. Drawing your sword in town without permission is a serious offense. Historians still argue whether the famous street duels of the 17th century were noble justice or just thinly veiled chaos. Either way, your lord has made it clear. Violence is for emergencies only, very rare, polite, paperwork-heavy emergencies. So you walk. A frog leaps across the stone path in front of you. You don't flinch. You're a samurai. You're above frogs. Even if that one was unnervingly large. There's a temple bell in the distance. You count it. 7 strikes. You mentally note it in your patrol log. Another hour to go. You pause beneath a gate to avoid the worst of the rain. Your armor creaks when you shift. You think about your ancestors. Your great-grandfather took an arrow to the ribs, storming a fortress. Your grandfather once held a bridge against 12 attackers. You inspected a tea house last week because someone reported that its lanterns were slightly too Western. You try not to feel ridiculous. You fail. Still, it's not like you're free to quit. The samurai class is hereditary. You were born into this, raised for it, trained in calligraphy, swordplay, etiquette, and, weirdly enough, incense sniffing. No, really. There was a whole art to recognizing different incense blends. It was part of being cultured. You still remember the shame of misidentifying sandalwood during your adolescence. The master didn't frown. He just sighed. A faint rustling to your left. You freeze. A stray cat stares at you from under a cart. It blinks, unimpressed. You pretend you were just inspecting the wheels. Sometimes you wonder if you could run away, be a farmer, or a monk, or maybe open a noodle shop. But no, you dishonor your family, your clan, your ancestors. Plus, legally, samurai weren't even allowed to farm. That's peasant work. You'd lose your status, your sword, and your meager stipend. And let's face it, your soba noodles aren't that good. So you sigh, straighten your back, and keep walking. A good samurai always finishes his patrol, even if the only thing he's protecting is his own sense of worth. A memory rises. The day you received your first katana. You were 12. The sword was too long, your hands too small, but you felt powerful. You imagined roaring into battle. You imagined honor, fame, tales sung around fires. You did not imagine rain, soggy rice balls, and the chronic lower back pain of patrolling uphill in full armor. You approach the castle gate. A fellow samurai stands there, shivering slightly, pretending not to. You nod at each other. Silent, mutual, bored. "Quiet night," he mutters. You nod again. Too quiet. It's always too quiet, and yet somehow never peaceful. You shuffle through the outer gate and feel the wood brush your sleeve. Not a battlefield gate kicked down in fury. Just a door. Just the side entrance to a world where nothing happens anymore. You shake the water off your helmet and hand off your patrol log. Another night done. Another 6 hours where you stared at empty streets and tried not to think about how deeply unnecessary you feel. You remember when you still believed in the dream, the romantic fog surrounding the word samurai, that you were one of the chosen, trained in honor, shaped by discipline, bred for battle. You thought you'd earn your scars like your ancestors had, in the dust of war. But now peace stretches out across the land like wet rice paper, too smooth, too thin, threatening to tear if anyone breathes too hard. And so far no one's dared. So the sword you sharpen every morning glows quietly in its lacquered scabbard. Immaculate. Useless. You wake up the next day to another routine breakfast. Miso soup, pickled radish, a square of grilled fish that tastes like hot sadness. Your wife barely looks up from her sewing. She's not mad. She's just dulled like everything else. You step outside and look at the cherry tree in the courtyard. Beautiful, fragile, and shedding. It's the perfect metaphor for your career. A passing monk once told you, "A falling petal is the sword's true nature." You wrote it down in your diary. You were 17. You thought it was deep. You head to your assigned post, the magistrate's annex. It's just another day of sitting beside an office door that hasn't seen a real dispute in weeks. Occasionally, someone comes by to report a neighbor's chicken wandering too close to their veranda. You bow. You log it. You sigh through your nose in the most dignified way possible. Every once in a while, a messenger gallops past with a scroll from Edo. You try not to look excited. It might be news, a disturbance maybe, but it's always something boring. A tax adjustment, a reminder to maintain proper haircuts. Once, thrillingly, a directive about improper poetry being circulated among lower-ranked officials. You copied that one into your diary too, just to feel something. Historians still argue whether the strict peace of Tokugawa Japan was a triumph of governance or a slow death for the warrior soul. It depends on who you ask. The commoners generally loved the stability. But you're stuck between two myths, the savage chaos of war and the choking order of peace. You meet your friend Yutaka after your shift. He's a fellow samurai. Technically, these days, he's been reassigned to handle shipping records for the regional warehouse. He used to duel. He once defended a shrine from bandits. Now he counts bags of barley and corrects clerks' penmanship. You sit together under the eaves, sipping oversteeped tea and watching the sky pretend to rain. "I miss feeling afraid," Yutaka says quietly. He doesn't mean it in a dark way, just in a way that's more alive than this. You nod. You miss adrenaline too. That rush, that thud in the chest, that sense of motion. Instead, you've got clogs, damp toes, a sore knee from sitting too long on a woven mat. In the dojo, the younger recruits still practice sparring. Their enthusiasm is charming and slightly irritating. They believe they'll matter. They shout their ki with bright red faces. Their instructors correct their footwork, their breathing, their posture. Not that it'll be used. Most of these kids will end up as town clerks or ceremonial guards, just like you. But you don't tell them that. Let them keep their fire a little longer. You pass by the shrine before bed. You bow low, say nothing, and just feel the dust of the prayer rope between your fingers. You wonder if the gods are as bored as you are. Back home, your daughter is reading. She's sharp. Too sharp. You know she sees through the charade. One time she asked you, "What do you actually do all day, Papa?" You lied. You said you protected the province, which is technically true, in the same way that polishing a sword protects it from rust. Useful, but unheroic. You try not to let the shame in, but it creeps anyway. That ancient companion. Not the dramatic storybook kind of shame. No, this is the quiet kind. The slow-burning, nothing is ever enough kind. The kind that follows you to sleep and whispers in your dreams. You dream of a battle that never happened. You're charging with dozens of others, your banner flapping above your head. Mud. Fire. The sting of sweat in your eyes. Then, just as your blade meets resistance, it's morning. You're lying in your futon, and it's raining again. Later that week, there's a ceremony. Something about honoring a visiting daimyo. You're assigned to stand near the incense brazier and look intimidating. Which is hard because the ceremonial armor smells like mildew, and it pinches in awkward places. You manage to stay alert for the first hour, but by the third, your vision starts to blur from the smoke. You don't dare cough, not in front of nobility. A small boy trips over his own sandal and faceplants into a tray of rice cakes. The entire room inhales. You steel yourself. This is your moment. You move smoothly, retrieve him, bow deeply, and retreat. Crisis averted. But the guests don't praise your composure. They barely notice. One old noble squints at you, like he's trying to remember if you're someone else. You bow again, and return to your corner. That night, your diary entry is one sentence. Saved child from rice disaster. No recognition. Armor rash developing. You try to laugh at yourself. You do, because the alternative is crumbling. Some nights, after your wife's asleep, you sneak outside and dukkata under the moonlight. Just you and your sword, your breathing, the crisp whoosh of a perfect cut. It feels like rebellion, or maybe prayer. The peach tree in the corner of the garden watches you silently. A petal falls onto your shoulder. You don't brush it off. You let it stay there. Soft, ridiculous, beautiful. Because somewhere, deep in the layers of your still beating heart, a part of you still believes that a moment might come, that your training wasn't in vain, that the calm is not forever. But until then, you fold your hakama neatly. You polish your blade until it reflects a man who barely knows himself. You bow at the proper angles, and you keep showing up, even when peace feels like exile. You wake before the sun again. Not out of urgency. There's nothing urgent anymore. But because your body has been trained to obey routine more fiercely than it obeys desire. You swing your legs over the mat, touch the cold floor with your heels, and stare for a moment at the fading ink scroll above your altar. The character for shame hangs there in elegant calligraphy, like a silent tutor. You chose to hang it there. It keeps you sharp. Or it's supposed to. See, in this world, honor isn't something you earn once. It's something you defend every second. You can't relax, ever. Even your sighs are judged. You bow too deeply, and people think you're insecure. Too shallow, and they'll say you're arrogant. Your name, your clan, your ancestors, they all live or die based on the angle of your eyebrows. Today, you're attending a local dispute arbitration. You're not a judge. You're not even the scribe. You're just there to look serious, to be a wall of reputation. And reputation, not truth, is what matters. The issue is simple. A boundary line between two rice plots, half a foot wide, that may or may not have shifted after last spring's flooding. Both men are commoners. They bow so many times they look like reeds in wind. They both pretend not to look at you. You say nothing, that's your job. Your silence is weight. Your silence is signal. They're terrified of shaming themselves, or worse, of shaming you. The presence of a samurai means their behavior must be flawless. One misplaced word could mean a lifetime of whispers. The older farmer trembles slightly as he speaks. You notice. Everyone notices. Historians still argue whether the samurai obsession with shame was cultural discipline or psychological torture in slow motion. Either way, it worked. People police themselves around you. They adjust their speech. They avoid your eyes. You haven't raised your voice in 7 years, and yet, entire rooms shift their atmosphere the second you step inside. But inside, you're tired. The truth is, the shame sword cuts both ways. You're not just the judge, you're the judged. Every interaction, every movement, an audition for dignity. You remember that time you tripped on a loose tile while crossing the castle courtyard. You didn't fall, but you flailed a little. A guard saw. He smirked. You still think about it at night. Shame doesn't need witnesses. It lives in your bones. At midday, you sit on a veranda overlooking the koi pond. A servant brings tea. He bows properly. He uses the right phrasing. You acknowledge him with a nod. Not too friendly, not too cold. If you're too kind, people think you're trying to cover for something. If you're too curt, they think you're arrogant. There's no winning, only balancing. Your tea is too hot. You sip anyway. Pain is less embarrassing than hesitation. Down by the pond, the koi swirl in lazy circles. One of them has a torn fin. You wonder if it knows. If the other fish treat it differently. Probably not. Fish don't care about reputations. A boy rushes by the courtyard chasing a rolling ball. He laughs. He doesn't bow. A servant snaps at him, her voice sharp with panic. She glances at you, expecting disapproval. You nod, slowly, and turn your eyes away. Even joy is suspicious in your presence. You walk the inner path later, the one behind the records hall. You like it because it's quiet and because it passes the willow tree. The one that bent during last year's storm but didn't break. You respect it. It looks imperfect, but it stands. You overhear two junior samurai talking. They don't see you. One says, "Did you hear about Tetsuo? He laughed during his cousin's memorial. Said he was remembering a joke." A pause. Laughed? Just a little. They're saying he might be reassigned to boundary patrol. You keep walking. No reaction, but your stomach knots. You knew Tetsuo. He was kind. He once gave you plum wine on your birthday. Not because he had to, just because. You liked him. And now he's being erased. That night you're invited to a poetry gathering. It's meant to be informal, but nothing is ever informal in your world. You wear your best kimono. You check it twice for lint and threadbare spots. Your wife helps adjust your collar. Neither of you speaks. At the gathering, there's laughter, but polite laughter. Measured. One of the lords reads a verse about cherry blossoms. It's good. Not great, but no one says so. Everyone nods like they've glimpsed the divine. You're asked to read. You prepared something. It's short, quiet. It's about waiting, about the silence between footsteps. You wrote it last week, alone in the rain. When you read it, the room stills. Not with admiration, with evaluation. Later, a guest compliments you. Subtle, he says. You don't know if it's praise or a warning. You nod anyway. Back home, your daughter peeks around the shoji screen. "Did they like your poem?" she asks. You hesitate. "I think so." She disappears, satisfied. You sit by the lantern and untie your sash slowly. You wonder what would happen if you simply wrote a funny poem one day. About cats? Or fish? Or that one time your uncle mistook pickled plum for soap and didn't notice for a whole meal. But no, you'd be marked. Unserious, disrespectful. You'd spend years recovering. Shame in this life is like weather. You don't always see it, but it's always in the air. It shapes the roads, the buildings, even the angles of your voice. You're supposed to be above it, to wield it like a weapon. But some days, it feels more like a leash. You lie down that night and stare at the ceiling. You remember the boy chasing the ball. You remember Tetsuo's laugh. You remember your own laughter, long ago, when things were still new. You wonder where it went. You close your eyes. You dream of nothing. Which, tonight, feels merciful. The sword sits on its rack beside the door, polished, reverent, untouched. You look at it every morning, and for a split second, just one, you remember that it was made for cutting. You remember how its blade was forged and folded 1,000 times, how its edge could slice a reed mid-air. But these days, it slices nothing, not even paper. You haven't drawn it in years. And that, honestly, is part of the point. Because your sword, now, is less a weapon and more a symbol, a badge, a heavy gleaming reminder that you were once expected to be dangerous. Now, you're expected to be decorative, impressive, quiet, a glass tiger. You strap the katana to your side anyway. You don't have a choice. The daisho, the paired long and short swords, are required whenever you step outside in official capacity. They're not just tools. They're your identity. Without them, you're just another man in a robe. With them, you're a samurai, even if you're mostly navigating office corridors instead of battlefields. Today, you're helping prepare for an inventory inspection, not of weapons, of roof tiles. You walk through rows of outbuildings with a stern-faced clerk and count replacement tiles stacked in neat bundles. You're there to ensure no one's stealing. Which is funny, Because if someone were stealing roof tiles, you doubt they'd do it while escorted by a man in full hakama with 2 swords and a look of existential defeat. Still, you nod and squint at the bundles, occasionally crossing your arms to look official. The clerk sweats nervously beside you, even though he's done this a dozen times before. That's what your presence does. It turns simple tasks into silent tests. A tile falls and chips at your feet. He gasps. You don't flinch. You stare at the broken shard for a long time until the silence grows uncomfortable. Then gently, you say, "It's just a tile." The clerk exhales, like you've pardoned his entire lineage. You think about how much tension your presence causes, not because you intend it, but because the culture demands it. Your ancestors wielded fear like fire. You wield discomfort like a damp blanket. Back in the office, someone has spilled ink on a ledger. The assistant responsible bows repeatedly, his face red. You take a breath, you're not even in charge here. But your status turns every accident into an offense. You wave it off with a non-committal, It's the kindest sound you've made all day. By noon, your sword has begun to press awkwardly against your ribs. You shift slightly, but you can't remove it. Even seated, it must remain visible, angled just so. The scabbard glints in the sunlight. Beautiful, ceremonial, heavy. The truth is, you're starting to resent it. You remember training with it, the ache in your shoulders, the endless repetitions. You remember the cuts that healed slow and taught fast. But now, the weapon you loved feels like a cage. You don't wield it. It clings to you, not as a tool of action, but as a symbol of restraint. Historians still argue whether this transformation, from warrior to bureaucrat, was noble evolution or quiet humiliation. Some say the sword's presence in peaceful times upheld discipline. Others say it was pageantry, a costume worn long after the role had been written out. And sometimes when you catch your own reflection walking past lacquered doors, you wonder which one you are. Are you the guardian of tradition, or a ghost in an embroidered bathrobe? In the afternoon, a merchant visits the compound. He's from Osaka. Bright robes, confident gait. You nod politely. He bows, but not deeply. He talks quickly, casually. He's probably wealthier than every samurai in the room combined. You don't like him, but you can't show it. The merchant jokes with one of the junior scribes. The scribe laughs, loudly, then sees you watching and goes pale. Later, the merchant gives a slight smirk. It must be hard, he says, carrying all that steel and never needing to use it. You smile, thin, polite. You want to say 1,000 things, but you've been trained not to react, so you nod and reply, better unused than used wrongly. He doesn't get it, or he doesn't care. That night, you return home and unfasten your sword with care. You set it on its rack like a priest laying down relics. Your daughter watches you from the doorframe. "Papa," she asks, "will I get to carry a sword someday?" You chuckle. "No," you say, "but you'll carry something heavier." She frowns. "Like what?" You look at her and wonder if she'll ever feel what you do. The tension between pride and pointlessness. You hope not. You hope the future finds her softer. After she's asleep, you take out your sword again. You sit in the quiet, unsheath it just a little. The metal whispers against wood. You study its surface, flawless. It deserves more than this. But what would you even cut? The air? Your reflection? You resheath it. Slowly. Carefully. Like tucking away a piece of yourself that doesn't fit this century. Outside, a dog barks in the distance. You think about drawing your blade, running into the street, and yelling like a madman just to do something. Anything. But instead, you light a lamp, open your journal, and write. Sword sharp, heart dull. You add a little sketch of a broken tile beneath it. For humor. No one will see it, but it helps. Sometimes the only thing you can cut anymore is the silence. Yo. The brush in your hand trembles slightly as you begin the day's most grueling task, paperwork. No, not reading it, not approving it, not even signing it. You're copying it, line by line, stroke by agonizing stroke, from one form to another, because the original document had an ink smudge and the magistrate declared it unfit for storage. So now you, a samurai trained in the blade, are dueling with paper. Again. And you'll lose. You always lose. Your brush catches on a fiber in the parchment. It splatters. You don't swear. Swearing is not permitted. Instead, you pause and inhale through your nose, the universally approved outlet for pure bureaucratic despair. You reach for a fresh sheet, and you start again. They told you during your youth that precision was a warrior's virtue, that controlling the sword begins with controlling the pen. At the time, it felt poetic, balanced, zen-like. Now it feels like a cruel joke played by history. Your posture is perfect. Your expression is unreadable. Your soul is screaming. The magistrate passes behind you and offers a curt nod of approval. You bow slightly, eyes downcast. It's not about the copying. It's about the performance. You must appear to love it, or at least not hate it with the slow-burning fury of 1,000 unsung ballads. See, after centuries of warfare, the Tokugawa period said, let's try something new. Let's have rules. And boy, did they deliver. Laws, edicts, regulations about lantern heights, kimono fabrics, ceremonial tea protocols, and, yes, document formatting. There's a regulation for how to copy a regulation. Historians still argue whether this explosion of samurai bureaucracy preserved the peace or stifled the spirit. All you know is you spent your morning adjusting margins and your afternoon rewriting the margins you adjusted. And it's not just forms. There are rank charts, attendance scrolls, rice allotment tables, inspection logs, arrest warrants, almost always blank, temple correspondence, and ceremonial invitations that must be delivered with exactly 4 folds and sealed with the correct wax stamp. You've developed a nervous tic. Every time you see a blank sheet of paper, your hand twitches to align it with your desk's edge. You've begun dreaming in vertical columns. You remember the stories of your grandfather, who once wrote his resignation letter with blood on parchment after a betrayal by a rival clan. He had to escape under moonlight. His horse was shot out from under him. He leapt into a river and floated for 2 miles while clutching that letter to his chest. Last week, your ink pot spilled on your robe, and you cried for an hour in the supply closet. You take a break and walk the hallways. It's supposed to clear your mind. Instead, you end up staring at a notice board where 10 scrolls describe a new process for verifying vegetable counts at market inspections. There's a 3-scroll addendum clarifying which vegetables count as leafy. You're not making this up. Someone debated whether daikon counts. You return to your station. Your writing mat has slightly shifted. That's a problem. If someone walks by and sees a misaligned mat, they'll make a note. That note will go in a folder. That folder will be reviewed in a seasonal behavior assessment. That assessment might affect your rice stipend. You fix the mat. You resume writing. You stop feeling your legs. The samurai next to you, Matsuda, clears his throat in what can only be described as a haiku of despair. He hasn't spoken in hours. Just breathing, shifting, and occasionally groaning at volumes barely perceptible to the human ear. Do you remember when we trained with spears? He whispers suddenly. You nod. We used to sprint up mountains. He sighs. Yesterday I got scolded for using the wrong shade of ink. You both sit in silence, two once proud warriors reduced to punctuation clerks. Later, you're summoned to a rule clarification session. This is a real thing. A gathering where mid-ranking samurai gather to read out new rules and make sure everyone understands how they'll be enforced. Today's topic: the appropriate degree of bowing during seasonal gift exchanges. Apparently, someone bowed too deeply when delivering chestnuts to a superior. The superior felt it was mocking. You nod solemnly while your spirit folds itself into a paper crane and drifts out the window. After the meeting, a junior samurai misquotes a regulation. Everyone hears it. No one corrects him. They'll just remember. And when his name comes up at the next ranking cycle, they'll all have concerns. That's how it works now. Battles fought with whispers, ambushes in meeting rooms, tactical silences. You retreat to the archive room. It smells like dust and regret. You pretend to be checking a box of old edicts, but really, you just need 5 minutes alone. You trace your finger along the edges of an ancient battle report. Real ink from a real war. It's spattered, uneven, urgent. You envy it. You return home late. Your hands ache from gripping the brush all day. You rub your knuckles and wonder how many generations it takes for a warrior's body to evolve into a scribe's. You're already halfway there. Your calluses are gone. Your sword hand cramps when you so much as lift a kettle. You find your journal and write, "Fought a mighty battle today, against the wrong ink." You consider ending the sentence with a dramatic flourish. You do. Then you cross it out. You see your sword rack. You haven't touched it in days. Just for the feeling, you unsheath the blade half an inch. The whisper of steel is so sharp it gives you chills. You imagine marching down the main corridor and slicing every scroll in half, but instead, you slide the blade back in and bow your head. You're not a warrior of war anymore. You're a soldier of systems, a knight of bureaucracy, a reluctant monk in the temple of rules. Tomorrow, you'll do it again, because someone has to. And apparently, that someone is you. You adjust the inkstone on your desk for the 4th time, not because it's out of place, it isn't, but because it gives you something to do while pretending you're still in control of your own story. Outside, cicadas sing their endless screeching lullaby. You envy their consistency. At least they know what they're supposed to do. You're waiting on a ledger review today. Land surveys, tax declarations, some dispute over fishing rights along the edge of the marsh. Not exciting, not dangerous, not even particularly complicated, but it must be done with the seriousness of a military tribunal. Because you, a samurai, are expected to treat every rice paddy boundary like it's a matter of national security. They told you when you were young that you'd be upholding law and order. What they didn't say was that your battlefield would be paper, and your enemy would be mildew, ink smudges, and local landowners with suspiciously vague property lines. The village headman arrives right on time. Bowed back, patched clothes, eyes like polished stones. He carries a stack of rice paper scrolls bound together with twine. He bows, you bow. Then he bows again. You bow again. Slightly less than before because hierarchy. It's like a dance no one enjoys, but everyone knows the steps. You invite him to sit. He declines. Too much respect. You insist. He folds his knees with a groan, like an old temple gate creaking open. You take the scrolls and begin reviewing them. Plot number 17B. Boundary dispute with a neighbor over who owns the willow tree. You sigh internally. Plot number 22C. A footpath was widened without formal approval. You make a note. Plot number 31A. The fishing rights issue? Here we go. Apparently, the river shifted slightly after last spring's flooding. A few feet, nothing dramatic. but enough that the old markers don't match the current flow. And now, two families both claim the same stretch of bank. One says it's ancestral. The other says it was agreed upon in a verbal promise 30 years ago. Historians still argue whether the samurai class genuinely believed in the importance of such disputes, or if they were simply clinging to a system that gave them any purpose at all. You don't know, but you do know this. If you get it wrong, someone's going to carry that grudge until death. You read the descriptions slowly, meticulously. You squint at the maps, you nod, and ask 3 meaningless but formal questions, just so it feels like an investigation. Then you say, "We'll notify both families of the final ruling next month." You sign your name official, unreadable, immutable. The headman bows. He says something kind about your fairness. You smile, wooden and practiced. He leaves. You sit there with the scrolls in your lap, staring at the spot where he knelt. You think, this is what I am now, an arbiter of willow trees and water. Your uncle used to say, a samurai without war must master stillness. You think you've mastered it too well. You are so still you've become furniture. You rise and stretch. Your knees pop. Somewhere deep in your soul, a little help echoes faintly. In the main hall, a new clerk is learning the ledger system. He bows when you pass, his eyes wide with nervous energy. You see yourself in him. 20 years ago, you were the same, eager to serve, eager to prove your honor. You hadn't yet realized that honor in this world is mostly paperwork and weather reports. You decide to visit the regional storehouse, not because you need to, just because movement feels rebellious. The clerk there shows you his charts with trembling fingers, rice quantities, tool inventories, rope counts. You nod, make a joke about the rats being better fed than some guards. He doesn't laugh. He's not sure if that was satire or a test. You wish someone would laugh, just once, openly, loudly, without fear. You return to the compound just in time for an administrative briefing on canal maintenance. You're not involved in canal maintenance. You were not invited. But you show up anyway because you've learned that visibility matters more than efficiency. Your presence communicates stability. Or something. You take notes on something called controlled seepage, and quietly wonder if that phrase describes your entire career. When the meeting ends, you find a bench near the garden wall. You sit. You listen. The wind moves through bamboo, soft and hollow, like a forgotten melody. A fellow samurai walks by. He pauses. "Canal seepage?" he asks. You nod. He groans. "Last week I sat through a seminar on eel migration. 2 hours." You both shake your heads like old farmers discussing a failed harvest. A butterfly lands on your sleeve. You stare at it. It flaps twice, then leaves, unconcerned, unconscripted. You whisper, "Take me with you." But no one does. Not the butterfly, not the wind, not even the clouds. At home that night, your wife asks how your day was. You pause. Say, "It was fine." She nods, says nothing. You both understand the weight behind that word. Fine means another day where nothing went wrong, but nothing mattered. You polish your sword before bed, not because it needs it, but because it's the only part of your identity that still shines back when you touch it. You run your fingers along the blade's edge, sharp, impossibly sharp, but only if it's ever used. You imagine marching into the magistrate's office and slicing a stack of tax scrolls in half. You imagine turning your reports into confetti. You imagine standing in the village square and yelling, "The willows can sort themselves." But you don't. You just wipe the blade, oil it, and return it to its stand. Your daughter sneaks in as you're blowing out the lantern. She's supposed to be asleep. "Papa," she whispers, "do rivers really move on their own?" You think for a long moment. Yes, you say finally, but only if we stop trying to control them. She nods like that makes perfect sense. Maybe it does. She pads away, silent on the tatami. You lie back, eyes open in the dark, listening to the stillness. A river shifted. A tree changed sides. 2 families will worry about it for years. You'll record it, sign it, and move on. Because that's what you do now. You're not a warrior of conquest. You're a gardener of borders. And the weeds never stop growing. You sit perfectly still at the morning meeting while your superior reads from a scroll about recent updates to robe length regulations. That's right. Robe length. Apparently, someone from the adjoining province allowed their underkimono to show by an extra half-inch while bowing. A crisis of dignity, an epidemic of sloppiness, a ripple in the harmony of the state. You nod solemnly. Inside, something is quietly melting. The meeting ends with a shared vow to maintain impeccable standards. You all bow. You all say, "Hi" in unison. You all file out like ghosts who once had purpose. You head back to your desk. Another day begins. Except, your stomach twists when you hear the door slide open. The voice behind it is soft, slow, deliberate. A messenger from the inner court. He hands you a sealed letter. You bow, he bows, he disappears. You stare at the letter for a moment. The seal isn't wax. It's ink stamped in red with your clan's insignia. Not common, not casual. You open it. A formal reprimand. Apparently, last week during the seasonal shrine procession, you hesitated for one breath too long before saluting the second assistant to the chief attendant. A man who, for the record, was standing behind a pillar and entirely invisible at the time. But that doesn't matter. Someone saw. Someone noted it. And someone decided it required official attention. You read the letter twice. Your stomach sinks. Not because you're angry. No. Anger would feel alive. But because now you know what comes next. The shame circuit. First, you'll be summoned for a quiet reminder. Then your name will appear lower on the next internal ranking chart. You'll be assigned to duties slightly more tedious than your current ones. Perhaps record duplication or horse manure oversight. And finally, your next poetry submission will be accidentally left off the recital list. Shame is slow here. It moves like fog, seeping into everything without anyone admitting it's there. You remember that time your friend Yukio received 2 reprimands in one season? He started coughing blood 3 months later. No one said they were connected. No one had to. Historians still argue whether emotional suppression was the true glue of the samurai code, or its fatal flaw. Whether the silence created strength, or merely buried trauma so deep it fermented into ghosts. You head to the shrine that afternoon, hoping to steady your thoughts. It's quiet as usual. A few pigeons shuffle in the gravel. You toss a coin into the offering box and bow. The monk approaches, the old one with the missing teeth and the suspiciously well-maintained sandals. Still carrying that invisible weight? He asks. You nod. He smiles, one tooth shining like a lighthouse in the fog. You know, the heaviest thing I ever held, he says, was the need to pretend I wasn't sad. You don't reply, but later you write it down in your journal. The heaviest thing is the need to pretend you're not sad. It sits right beneath your usual log entry. Date, 5th moon, 12th day, rainy. Duties, letter copying, incense record review, robe length compliance. Mood, like a carefully folded piece of paper that nobody will ever read. That night, your daughter finds you polishing your wakizashi, the short sword. You're holding it like it might offer advice. or at least sympathy. "Why do you do that so much?" she asks. You pause. It's part of the code. What's the code? You think for a while. Then you say, "It's like rules for how to hold yourself when you're carrying 1,000 invisible things." She nods, very seriously. "Like when I have to be polite even if I'm tired." You smile. Exactly like that. She thinks about this. Then, "But what if the things get too heavy?" You look at the blade. You think about what it was designed for, about what it means. You say, then you learn how to carry them differently. You don't mention the old tradition, the final act, reserved for those bound by honor. You don't say that, in disgrace, a blade resting in one's lap could become a wordless confession. You leave out that some warriors practiced it in silence, night after night, just in case. There's no need to bring that into a child's world. But you remember. You remember the story of Araki Mataemon, who once waited days in hiding just to confront a man who insulted his honor. The story says he cleaned his blade with calm dignity after the duel, while the town held its breath. Now, your greatest insult was a misbow. Your greatest confrontation was with a clerk over supply records. And when you clean your blade, it's to remove dust, not blood. You wonder what Mataemon would think of you. Probably nothing flattering. But then again, he didn't live in a time where bowing too late meant social exile. You tuck the wakizashi back into its sheath. Your daughter is already asleep, curled like a question mark. You lie down beside the fading lantern light and let your breath slow. In the quiet, you admit something to yourself. You are exhausted not from what you do, but from what you're never allowed to feel. Because in this life, emotion is indulgent, grief is weakness, joy is frivolous, and rage. Rage is radioactive. Keep it sealed, buried, archived. So you become a museum of your own self, a collection of expressions that fit every season, a curator of silence. But late at night, when the world softens, you imagine what it would be like to feel freely, to weep in public, to laugh without consequences, to scream into the wind and not fear a demotion. But instead you roll over and stare at the ceiling. And you whisper one line to no one at all. "I miss myself." Yeah. You wake up hungry. Not the kind of hunger that nudges you toward a bowl of rice. The other kind. The one that seeps through your ribs and coils behind your heart. A hunger for doing, for making, for meaning. But you dress anyway. Formal robe, swords, proper folds. Half smile. It's not the first morning your body has walked without your spirit. In the courtyard, you catch sight of a rice farmer trudging past with a yoke over his shoulders. He's bent, soaked with sweat, and absolutely free. Because here's the cruelest joke of all. You are not allowed to farm. That's right. Not just discouraged. Forbidden. Under Tokugawa law, samurai must not lower themselves to peasant work. It's beneath you. Even if your family is broke, even if your land yields nothing, even if you're skilled with the sickle and your hands itch to pull weeds from soil, it's illegal and disgraceful. You're supposed to live off a stipend, rice from your lord, a fixed amount. In theory, it's dignified. In practice, it's laughable. Yours hasn't increased in years. Prices rise. Families grow. Unexpected costs show up like uninvited guests. A torn sash, a sick child, a rusted roof beam. You try to keep up. You budget. You tighten. You fast. And yet you still sit beside your fire, counting coins like a merchant and praying the wind doesn't tear your outer wall down. That farmer you passed? He'll sleep with a full stomach tonight. You'll be slicing pickled radish into quarters to make it last the week. Historians still argue whether the law against samurai farming preserved class purity or trapped generations in polite starvation. What's clear is this: dignity, when enforced with shackles, becomes a burden. You've tried other things, of course, discreet things, quiet side hustles. Once you took up brush painting. Your strokes were clean, bold. You sold 2 pieces to a merchant who thought they were done by a noble. You didn't correct him. Another time you tried tutoring, reading, sword etiquette, basic mathematics. You were decent, but the whispers started. Look at him, begging for coins. He teaches merchant sons now? How tragic. So you stopped? Even now you repair your own sandals at night, in secret, with the curtain drawn, just in case someone walks by. The idea of purity of class was supposed to protect the order of things. Samurai fight, peasants grow, artisans build, merchants trade, everyone in their place. But that structure works only if each piece has what it needs. You don't. You're a samurai without war, without income, without even the right to till your own garden. And when your roof leaks, you don't fix it. You endure it. There's an old samurai, Ito, who lives 3 houses down. He used to serve a powerful lord in the north, lost his stipend after a political reshuffle. Now he carves spoons, beautiful ones too, but he doesn't sell them. He gives them away, under the pretense that they're gifts for children. Everyone knows he's surviving off gratitude and rice scraps. You offered him a coin once. He looked at you like you'd stabbed him. You didn't try again. Shame is a tighter collar than hunger. Today, your job is to stand watch during a delivery from the capital. Silk bolts, inkstones, scrolls. The goods are lifted with care, cataloged with precision, then vanished into storerooms where they'll sit untouched for months. Your presence is symbolic. A samurai watches over the goods, so the goods become sacred. You tighten your obi and take your place beside the warehouse door. You pretend you're a gate of iron, but you're thinking about stew, a big one, with miso and leeks and sweet potatoes. Someone once said that pride is what fills the belly when food cannot. That person clearly never tried surviving on pride alone. It burns fast, and it's flavorless. A low-ranking clerk walks by, munching roasted chestnuts. He offers you one, hesitates, then retracts it. "Oh, apologies," he says. "Didn't mean to offend." You smile, wave him on, and stare at the empty space where the chestnut was. You're not offended, just devastated. Later, you walk home past a vendor selling grilled skewers. The smell follows you like a ghost with good taste. You don't stop. You can't. Someone might see. Someone might ask why you're counting coins. Back home, your wife has prepared soup. Thin, but hot. You say thank you, like it's a gift from the gods. She doesn't speak, but her eyes say, "I'm sorry this is all we have." You reach out, squeeze her hand. It's enough. It isn't, but it has to be. Your daughter draws a picture in the corner. She hands it to you with pride. It's of you, tall, sword in hand, standing on a hill with the sun behind you. You want to laugh, or cry, or tear it into tiny pieces and tell her the truth. But instead you say, "This is beautiful. Is that really me?" She nods. You look strong. You tuck the picture into your journal. Between a scrawled rice budget and a haiku, you wrote about an empty cupboard. That night the rain comes, hard. You set out bowls under the leak spots. The wind howls. The roof trembles. You sit by the hearth, sword beside you, and stare into the flames. You think, maybe you could farm. Out in the woods? Secretly. Just a patch of land no one sees. You could grow yams, carrots, be free from all this. But then you remember the law, the risk. the whispers, the sword that would be taken, the name that would be erased. So you drink your thin soup. You write in your journal, I am not allowed to survive in the most obvious way, so I survive the hard way. You add, roof leaks. Again, patched it with shame and old parchment. And you smile, because if you don't laugh a little, the silence will eat you whole. You tuck yourself under the futon. You dream of fields, of dirt under fingernails, of onions that don't judge you. You dream of sweat that means something. You wake before dawn and carry on. Nee. The matchmaker arrives just after the morning bell, her sandals soft on the gravel, her robes louder than they have any right to be. You watch from behind the screen as your wife brings her tea. She bows low, not too low. Every movement measured. You weren't expecting her today, but you know what it means. Your cousin's eldest son has come of age. Another marriage must be arranged. In your world, marriage is never about love. It's about placement. It's about land, family name, political alliances, and, most of all, shame management. Who's fallen in rank? Who needs restoring? Who made a mistake 3 years ago that still clings like smoke on silk? You're drawn into the room eventually. The matchmaker smiles like a fox in robes. You bow. She bows deeper. Her eyes never leave yours. He's grown tall, she says, good shoulders, and a face that doesn't offend. You say nothing. Compliments are traps. She outlines the candidates. Each family comes with a list of assets, dowry terms, and invisible red flags. One girl's father once spoke too bluntly during a tea ceremony. Another family had a relative accused of theft, proven false, but the rumor persists. A third family is wealthy, but newly so, which is worse than being poor. And so it goes. You listen, nod, ask the right questions. You feel like you're reviewing livestock, but the livestock can recite poetry and knows when you're faking interest. The boy in question, your cousin's son, Tedaditi, is nervous, honorable, and utterly unprepared. He still writes verses about falling leaves like it's profound. You envy him. After she leaves, your wife asks your opinion? You shrug. None of the options will ruin the family, you say. That's as close as you get to praise. Because the goal of samurai marriage is not happiness, it's stability. Joy is not required. Compatibility is a bonus. You are not meant to love your spouse. You are meant to honor them. And if that sounds cold, remember this. Love is dangerous in your world. Love leads to passion, to mistakes, to shame. Arranged marriages prevent chaos, mostly. You remember your own match. You were 20. She was 17. You'd seen her once before, at a New Year's ceremony, her hair pinned in trembling silver. She bowed but didn't meet your eyes. The marriage was negotiated by 4 elders and a reluctant uncle. The dowry included 3 bolts of fine linen and a lacquered comb. You spoke no words to her until the wedding night. You've grown into each other, slowly, like 2 trees planted side by side. You bend around each other's shadows. You've never said I love you. You're not sure you know what it means, but when she brings you tea in the evening and straightens the crease in your sleeve, you feel something like loyalty. That has to be enough. Historians still argue whether samurai marriages were repressive systems or quiet triumphs of stoic companionship. You'd argue they were neither. Just survival. Just partnership under pressure. A team against shame. You attend a wedding 2 days later. Another cousin, another match. The bride looks like she might bolt. The groom looks like he already has. Emotionally, at least. But the ceremony is perfect. The bowing angles are textbook. The incense smoke swirls just right. You stand in the second row, sword at your side, expression serene. You think, This is theater. Well rehearsed, beautiful, hollow. At the reception, someone mentions a samurai who married a merchant's daughter. The story is whispered like a crime. She's pretty, someone says. She's unregistered, another corrects. They had to falsify her lineage. A silence falls. You sip your tea. Bitter. Later, you find a quiet spot under a tree and watch the lanterns sway. The bride walks by, her new robe's heavy. She meets your eyes. Just for a moment. She looks like she wants to run, or scream, or disappear. You give her the smallest nod. She walks on. That night you return home, and your wife asks how it went. Beautiful, you say, like a poem written by someone who's never felt anything. She laughs softly. That sound, rare, real, breaks through your shell a little. She sits beside you, brushing out her hair, long, dark, pinned for hours. You watch her hands. You think about all the times she's kept you from falling apart without either of you ever saying it out loud. Would you choose me? She asks suddenly. If there were no elders, no rules, no shame? You blink. A dangerous question. I would, you say, because it's true. She nods once, not as thanks, just acknowledgement. Then, I would too. And that's the end of it. No kisses, no vows, just two people tethered by years and silences that grew into something sturdy. In your journal that night, you write, marriage is like armor, not always comfortable, rarely beautiful, but it holds when struck. You sketch a tiny comb beside it. You hear footsteps in the next room, your daughter practicing her dance steps for an upcoming festival. She doesn't know yet how much her life will be shaped by paperwork, by family charts, by unseen debts. You wish you could shield her, but you can't. All you can do is raise her to be sturdy, gentle, but unbending. Someone who can survive being loved the samurai way, quietly, completely, with eyes always on the horizon. You blow out the lantern and lie in the dark, listening to her footsteps. Light like a heartbeat. Still free. Your socks are wrong. You didn't realize it until it was too late. You're already seated at the back of the assembly hall, waiting for the monthly status review to begin. And then, you glance down. Wrong weave, wrong season, too much white at the ankle. You try not to react. You try not to let it show. But your left eye twitches ever so slightly, because this mistake, this thread-level offense, could cost you. Not your job? No, not directly. But it'll be noticed. It'll be whispered. Your name will move slightly to the left on the seating chart next month. Your cousin won't look at you quite the same. The assistant to the assistant magistrate will forget to send you an invitation to the moon viewing picnic. Because in your world, everything matters, especially the things that shouldn't. Welcome to the unwritten laws of samurai fashion, Edo edition. You're expected to look precise, but not proud. Immaculate, but not flashy. Every layer of your clothing speaks to your rank, your role, your family, your recent behavior, and sometimes even your mood, but only if you're subtle about it. Too drab? You've stopped trying? Too bright? You're seeking attention. Wearing something slightly out of date? Nostalgic at best. Rebellious at worst. Someone once got reassigned for showing up to a funeral in a robe with too many family crests. They said it distracted from the grief. And don't even get started on hair. A slightly uneven top knot can ruin your standing faster than a misquoted proverb. You sit still, breathing carefully, trying to remember whether anyone actually saw your ankle earlier. You tug your hakama ever so slightly. A modest adjustment, not a cover-up. That would be shameful. A voice whispers from behind, "Silk in summer?" Your ears go hot, you don't turn around. Historians still argue whether the rigidity of samurai dress codes was a tool of moral discipline or simply a slow-motion prank by the upper classes. Either way, it worked. A well-tied sash could earn you trust. A sloppily arranged outer robe could destroy it. The meeting proceeds. Rice reports, shrine donation figures. A new poem submitted by a junior retainer. Gently mocked, but ultimately accepted. You nod when you're supposed to, blink at appropriate intervals, and pretend not to feel your shame crawling down your legs like an army of ants. After the meeting, you walk home the long way, through a narrow street where no one knows you. You pass a merchant's stall with imported cloth from China, colors like fire and sea, patterns so bold you feel embarrassed just looking at them. A child runs by in a robe with mismatched patches, happy, laughing, utterly unbothered. You envy him. You used to like clothing once. You remember that. Being a boy and touching different fabrics, admiring the way linen moved in the wind. You even tried dyeing something once. It turned out poorly, but you were proud of it. Now getting dressed is a minefield. You own 3 nearly identical sets of clothing, all regulation approved, each one stitched by a tailor who calls you "my lord," but raises his eyebrow every time you ask for something slightly outside the norm. You once asked for a blue slightly darker than what's typical. He paused, then said, "Bold, perhaps too bold." You changed your mind. The only piece of clothing that's yours, really yours, is an old undershirt with a hole at the hem. You wear it on days when your duties are light, when no one will see it, when you need to remember who you are underneath the rules. Today you change into it as soon as you're home. You fold your formal robes with careful disgust and tuck them away. Your wife sees the switch and says nothing, but her eyes soften. She understands. She brings you a small bowl of steamed sweet potato. The good kind? Golden, soft, almost floral. You both eat in silence. Comfort food, no ceremony. Later she asks, "Did anyone notice?" You hesitate. Only enough to make it matter. She nods. You think about all the unspoken dress violations you've seen over the years. A fraying sleeve here, a mismatched family crest there. You remember the time a visiting official wore the wrong type of sandals and the entire court collectively refused to mention it, as if to preserve the illusion that nothing ever goes wrong. Because to mention the mistake is to make it real. To acknowledge the breach is to let shame infect the air. So instead, people weaponize silence. A bowed head, a delayed greeting. A seat shifted 3 inches farther from the fire. You once saw a man exiled from a dinner party because his robe had foreign thread. You once heard a senior retainer say, "Better to go hungry than be seen in linen out of season." You once said the same thing to your daughter, and you regret it, more than anything, because she cried and then apologized for being 6 and liking pink. You kept that little pink scrap she dropped. It's hidden in your journal, between 2 pages titled "Acceptable Shoji Patterns by Province." Sometimes when no one's looking, you take it out and hold it. Because it's soft, because it's real, because it doesn't judge you. You finish your sweet potato and listen to the wind pulling at the eaves. You polish your sandals and prep tomorrow's robe. Perfect length, perfect formality. You stare at your socks. You fold them with precision. You whisper to them, "Don't ruin me." And then you lie back in the dark. The world outside rustles like silk. And you, the obedient thread, drift into sleep. The greeting is warm, almost too warm. You enter the estate of a minor official, summoned for a garden viewing and light refreshments, which is code for social fencing. Everyone smiles. Everyone bows. Everyone lies. Your host compliments your posture. Another remarks on the angle of your sword. A woman in a plum-colored kimono says your haiku from last month had the structure of moonlight. You're not sure that's even a compliment, but you bow deeply and thank her anyway. This is where the real battles happen now. In language, in tone, in what isn't said. You've studied it, mastered it even. Polite combat, passive-aggressive poetry, compliment as insult. The samurai life has become an opera of civility, a dance of smirks and honorifics. And you're the one standing in the middle of the stage, desperately trying not to miss a step. Your old swordsmanship teacher used to say, the sharpest blade is the one that cuts without moving. Back then, he meant presence. Now it means innuendo. Today's gathering is mostly low-level court figures and samurai from neighboring districts. Nobody powerful enough to change your life, but just powerful enough to ruin your week. You accept tea. You sit on the exact center of the third cushion, the one that signals humble but present. You make 2 comments during the first discussion, just enough to contribute, not enough to dominate. Everything is math. A retainer from the South mentions a dispute over property rights and how certain clans seem to collect favors more than responsibilities. He's looking directly at you when he says it. You smile, nod once, then reply, a full rice bowl often overflows. There's a silence. A few heads tilt in subtle appreciation. You've scored a hit, but a quiet one. It's exhausting. Historians still argue whether the social code of Edo period samurai refined culture or created a caste of fragile egos dressed in lacquer. But everyone agrees on this. The more peaceful the era, the more dangerous the compliments. You listen as another guest, a well-dressed young man from a declining family, performs a poetic offering. Wind through reeds echoes what we cannot say. Dinner ends cold. Everyone nods, as if they've just heard a revelation. You murmur, deep, because saying anything else would imply critique, and critique is violence now. Someone near you sneezes. A murmur passes through the gathering. You glance subtly. His sash is wrinkled. Poor man. You offer a neutral facial expression, one that says, I didn't see it, but I could have. That's what these gatherings are. Weaponized civility. The sharpening of silence. One samurai once famously said, nothing for an entire banquet, and became legendary for his restraint. People still argue over what he meant by his choice of beverage. You take a bite of pickled plum and nod approvingly. Not too approvingly. That would look desperate. Just enough. You remember your father warning you, learn the tone that sounds respectful, but means I'm watching you. Learn the smile that hides insult. Learn the phrase that stabs sideways. He once wrote a poem that was so perfectly passive-aggressive, it caused a minor official to develop a stress rash. That's power. A guest tells a story about a recent visit to a more rural village. The people were kind, he says, but their manners were rustic. You sip your tea and say, even the moon rises over unpolished fields. A chuckle, a nod. One man frowns. He's from a rural area. One point to you. Later, a poetry game begins. Improvised verses based on prompts. Your prompt? Stone. You close your eyes, pause just the right amount of time, then say, stone does not speak, yet the river shapes its name. Who listens better? There's a collective inhale. A few heads bow slightly. You watch your host's expression flicker. Was that too good? Did you outshine him? You add humbly, just a thought I had while repairing the garden wall. He nods, barely. That's when you realize you've won too much today. So you fake a misstep. You mention offhandedly that your sandals have been chafing, a subtle hint that perhaps your wardrobe maintenance is slipping, a gentle cell phone. The mood lightens. A fellow samurai leans in and jokes, "Even legends get blisters." You laugh, warm, self-deprecating. They like that. You've restored the balance. It's absurd. It's real. It's deadly. Later, walking home, you feel hollow. You've just spent 4 hours speaking in riddles, dodging daggers made of compliments, and hiding your actual self behind metaphors. You're tired. Not body tired. Soul tired. Your wife greets you at the gate. "How was it?" You sigh. "I think I was insulted 17 times, but very gently." She hands you a bowl of barley tea. That means you were noticed. You nod. In your journal, you write, "Today I was praised so subtly, I might have been erased. Countered with flattery so deft, I forgot my own face." You pause, add, "We used to duel with steel. Now we duel with adjectives." You lie in bed that night, eyes open. What would it feel like to speak plainly? To say, "I am tired," and not, like plum blossoms out of season, "I drift." To say, "I feel small," and not, "The moon casts long shadows when one walks alone." But that's not your world. In your world, clarity is dangerous. So you speak like everyone else, in fog and fragrance, and pray they don't smell fear. The sword sits on your hip like a well-fed cat. Elegant, silent, unimpressed. You wear it wherever you go. You have to. It's required. The long katana and the shorter wakizashi. Together they're called the daisho. Literally, big little. Symbol of the samurai, symbol of status. And in this era, a symbol more than a tool. Because you don't use it. Not really. It's been 5 years since you last drew your sword in public. And that wasn't even for a fight. It was to slice open a ceremonial scroll ribbon that had gotten tied too tightly. You remember how the crowd leaned in? Just a little. As the blade whispered through silk, you sheathed it again with perfect grace. They clapped. They bowed. It was the closest thing to action anyone had seen in months. That's what your weapon is now. A costume piece. A sacred prop. You walk through the town, passing by merchants and tea vendors. No one looks afraid. They part for you out of habit, not fear. A group of children scampers across your path. One of them carries a stick and mimics your stride. Exaggerated, silly. His friends laugh. You pretend not to notice. Years ago, samurai were terrifying. Their swords weren't decorations. They were declarations. Now, drawing your blade without official sanction is illegal. Even in self-defense, you'll be called before a tribunal. You'll write reports, submit statements, get demoted if you're lucky, exiled if you're not. You remember the story of a samurai who drew his sword during a petty dispute over spilled sake. The man he cut lived, barely. But the act itself? Unacceptable. They stripped the samurai of his title, took his weapons, sent him to a mountain temple to reflect. You visited that temple once. He was still there, still reflecting, mostly on moss. Historians still argue whether the samurai sword laws were a brilliant peacekeeping strategy or a slow death sentence for the warrior soul. All you know is your blade is sharper than your voice and equally unused. Today you've been assigned to walk escort duty for a visiting tax inspector. He's important. He's soft. He wears velvet in summer. You're his armor. As you walk behind him, hand on your scabbard, you feel like a painting. A samurai posed just right, lit from the left, captured in a moment of calm that will never change. Timeless, still. Dust-proof. He chats with local officials. You scan the crowd. You imagine danger. Imagine a knife hidden in a market basket, a sudden rush, a cry. You imagine moving, your body reacting, blade singing through air, purpose ignited. Nothing happens. The tax inspector sneezes. You adjust your grip. Later, he thanks you, says, "It's good to have someone intimidating behind me." You nod, smile thinly. He asks, "Do you ever have to actually use those?" You say, "Not in some time." He laughs. "Well, I suppose it's the thought that counts." You want to say, "No, it's not." But you don't. You return home and set your swords on their rack. You kneel. You bow. The ritual is precise. The blade gleams under lamplight. Still deadly. Still longing. Your daughter enters quietly. "Can I hold it?" she asks. You shake your head. "Not yet." She nods. "Will I get one someday?" "No," you say. "You don't need it." "Why not?" You pause. "Because you're allowed to be something else." She doesn't understand. Not yet, but she will. You stare at the blade. You remember your first lesson. The wooden floor. The sweat on your palms. The way the sword instructor moved. Like a current, not a man. You thought, "This is power, this is purpose." And now, you carry power like a relic. And your purpose wears velvet. You think about the time a samurai in your district tried to start a fencing school, to pass on technique, discipline, pride. He lasted 2 seasons before the town magistrate shut it down. Too many young men getting ideas. They repurposed the dojo into a records archive. You helped carry the scrolls in. You try to keep the forms alive. You still practice at night. Kata in the moonlight. Cuts against imaginary foes. Your breath sharp. Your spine straight. But you're no fool. You know the difference between practice and reality. You once heard of a man who wore a sword every day but filled the scabbard with wood. A fake. Lighter. Easier to carry. Some days, you wonder what your blade would think of you. If it could. If it still remembers what it was meant to be. That night, you dream of being attacked. A wild, roaring ambush. You draw your blade in the dream, and it's heavy. Too heavy. You swing. Miss. Fall. Wake up sweating. You sit up in the dark. You reach for the sword, unsheath it halfway. It still gleams. It still whispers. It still waits. But for what? You write in your journal. A sword that cannot be used is still sharp, but only as a mirror. And below that, I'm not sure if I'm the warrior anymore, or just the reflection. You sheath it again. Outside, a dog barks. You stay very still, because that too is part of the uniform. You're summoned to a poetry gathering. Again, this one's in the garden of a mid-ranking official who recently acquired a koi pond and wants everyone to know about it. You bring your notebook, your brush, and your best mask of quiet attentiveness. You hope it doesn't rain, not because of the weather, but because your poem is about rain, and that would feel cliché. The garden is immaculate. The lanterns are hung. The pond glistens like liquid jade. You count at least 20 koi, which is about 18 more than anyone needs. The host greets you with soft eyes and a bow 2 degrees deeper than necessary. A subtle show of deference that you're meant to acknowledge, but not return. You bow exactly 2 degrees shallower. Game on. The guests are seated on silk mats beneath a camphor tree. A breeze moves through like a whispered secret. Someone's reciting a verse about pine needles. Another offers a metaphor involving frogs and ambition. You nod. You sip tea. You wonder if anyone here actually feels anything, or if it's all performance. Then it's your turn. Your prompt is loss. You pause, as you must. You stare just past the assembled guests, as if seeing into some ancient, wordless sorrow. Then you speak. One plum blossom falls, without sound, and the branch sways, embarrassed to grieve. The silence after is exquisite. Some tilt their heads. A few close their eyes. Someone exhales, almost too loud. It's a success. But success is dangerous here. You've just declared emotional depth, publicly. You've invited interpretation. And in the samurai world, interpretation is a minefield. Because emotion must be controlled? Felt, perhaps, but always wrapped in silk and offered indirectly, like a scent on wind. Historians still argue whether the samurai obsession with poetry was about refinement or repression, whether it cultivated the soul or simply gave it a cage with nicer wallpaper. You sit back down, a guest beside you leans over and says, "Very brave." You smile, but inside a warning bell rings. Too much vulnerability, and someone might think you've become soft. Too little, and you risk being called unfeeling. The line between elegance and exposure is so thin you could cut it with a fan. You once saw a samurai cry, just once. It was at his brother's funeral. His tears were silent, controlled, but still, someone reported it. He was reassigned to logistics. You remember that every time you feel your throat tighten during a verse. Still, you keep writing. Because even if you can't scream, you can whisper in ink. Back home that night, your daughter is trying to write her first poem. She's stuck. "What are you writing about?" you ask. She shrugs. "I wanted to write about being sad, but I don't want it to sound too sad." You nod. You understand more than she knows. She reads what she has. A bird saw its nest. Gone, but sang anyway, soft, so the wind would stay. You pause, then say, "That's better than anything I heard today." She beams. You want to tell her that poetry used to be dangerous, that in some eras, the wrong poem could cost a man his life. That meaning is a blade, and sometimes the most beautiful ones are the sharpest. But she's still young. Let her write. You remember your first poem. It was about a bridge in winter. It was terrible, but your teacher said, "At least it tried." You've been trying ever since. The next morning, you receive a note from the poetry host. Beautiful calligraphy. No direct praise. Just, "The garden has been quieter since the blossom fell." That's how it's done. Praise hidden in metaphor. Compliment or critique? You decide. You show it to your wife. She frowns slightly. "Did you go too far?" "Maybe," you say. Later that week, someone forgets to invite you to the seasonal incense tasting. That's your answer. You write in your journal. One line too deep and the pond ripples. They want beauty, not bruises. You add, "But even silence has a rhythm, and I still want to dance." That night, you sit in your garden and compose a verse you'll never share. Some truths must be soft, like snow on an old rooftop, or they will collapse. You bow to the moon. You return to bed. The blade by your side hasn't moved in days. But your words? They're dangerous still. You walk the length of the hallway, sandals silent against the wood, passing portraits of men whose faces you've memorized more out of obligation than admiration. Ancestors, warriors, lords, saints of steel and strategy. Every hallway in the estate is lined with their eyes. Painted in rich color or faded ink, they stare down at you with unwavering judgment. Your great-grandfather is the one on the left, third frame from the shrine room. Eyes like a storm. According to family lore, he personally led a charge that broke the siege at Mount Takatani. His armor still hangs in the storehouse, wrapped in ceremonial cloth. You've touched it once. It smelled like lacquer, ash, and something deeper, something like purpose. You think about that often, because your own uniform smells like dust and ink. This morning's assignment involves reviewing castle maintenance requests. You sit cross-legged in the records room, fingers smudged with soot from an old lamp. A report says the south wall needs new plaster. Another suggests the bamboo fence near the lotus pond is contributing to an unharmonious aesthetic. Important work, they tell you. Preserving the estate's dignity. Guarding the image of tradition. But you know better. You're here to make sure everything looks fine, that the illusion remains unbroken. You're not maintaining a castle. You're maintaining a memory. And it's exhausting. Because the weight of your lineage presses harder than your armor ever did. When you were young, they told you stories of your forebears, men who split helmets, who rode into snowstorms, who sacrificed everything. Your father once said, "Our family bleeds upward." You asked what he meant. He said, "Every mistake you make stains the names above you." You never forgot that. You carry it everywhere. You walk through the courtyard where your grandfather used to train with live blades. You still remember watching him as a boy, the way his feet moved on gravel like water skipping across stone. He was already old then, but each cut was exact. Not angry, not showy, just pure. He died during a lantern festival. Quietly. Upright. They say he whispered a verse before he went. Something about the moon and the scent of pine. You don't remember the verse, but you remember his posture. Strong, even in death. Historians still argue whether the samurai obsession with ancestry preserved honor or suffocated individuality. Whether duty to the past inspired greatness or simply prevented becoming anything new. You lean toward the latter, because the past isn't a lantern you carry. It's a mountain you're chained to. Every time you speak, someone hears echoes of a man long dead. Every time you hesitate, someone says, "His grandfather wouldn't have paused." Every time you forget a greeting, misstep in a poem, or fail to fold your robe with geometrical precision, a ghost in the walls frowns. You see it in the elder's eyes. Not cruelty, just comparison. You could save a village from flood, and someone would say, "Yes, but his uncle once saved too." There is no winning, only not falling behind. You return home late. Your wife has left a small plate of pickles and rice by the hearth. She's asleep already. You sit alone, eating slowly. Your daughter peeks from her futon. "Papa," she whispers, "why do we have pictures of old people in every room?" You chuckle. "To remind us who we came from." She tilts her head. "But I came from you." You pause. You want to say, "Exactly." You want to say, "One day, someone will hang my picture, and I don't want them to look at it and feel dread." Instead, you say, "That's true, but they came before me too." She nods, then says, "You don't look like them." You glance toward the wall, a stern face with thick eyebrows and a sword that looks twice the size of yours. "No," you admit, "I don't." That night, you dream of fire. Not war, not violence, just fire. Warm, low, flickering across scrolls and armor racks. You walk through a hall of your ancestors. Their faces melt in the flame, not with horror, with relief, and then you stand alone. It feels like breathing for the first time. You wake up in sweat. In your journal, you write, "Legacy is a script we're told to memorize, but I wonder what it feels like to write my own." You sketch your great-grandfather's helmet, add a speech bubble that says, "Do something real." You smile, then cross it out. Later that week, you are asked to give a speech to junior retainers. The topic, living with the wisdom of our forebears. You nod. You prepare. You wear the correct robe. You speak about courage, about balance, about discipline. But near the end, your voice shifts. You say, "We are told to honor the past. That is good. But remember, those who came before us didn't stare at portraits. They acted, they risked, they changed things. Don't let your ancestors become excuses. Let them be starting points, not chains." Silence. Then polite applause. Later, someone tells you, "That was bold." You wait for a reprimand. It never comes. Just a note on your desk the next morning. Written in unfamiliar hand. The mountain is tall, but some climb down and build something better. You fold the note. Slip it into your journal, right next to the ghost sketch. The ink runs slightly as you finish signing your name at the bottom of the notice. It's a form. Another one. Approving a temporary teaching license for a retired samurai, now giving calligraphy lessons in the Western District. You pause for a second, eyes tracing the brush strokes of his name. Masuda Ichiro. The man once served as a border guard in the north. Now he's teaching children how to hold a brush without trembling. You set down the brush and lean back. These days, every samurai you know has a side job. They don't talk about it, not openly, but it's there in the quiet exchanges, the nods, the fading pride. Men who once polished armor, now polishing stones. Swordsmen selling maps, warriors making fans. And you? You write official approvals for their hustle. You step outside to clear your head and see Kenta walking by with a bundle of scrolls. He used to serve under a warlord known for iron-fisted strategy. Now, Kenta draws family trees for minor merchants, elaborate diagrams full of decorative flourishes and invented nobility. It's fiction, but profitable fiction. He nods to you. You nod back. Neither of you says a word. You stop by the market on your way home. Quietly. Hood up. There's a stall selling hand-carved netsuke, miniature toggles for kimono cords. You recognize the style. A fellow samurai retired last spring. You used to spar with him every 5th day. He once disarmed you with a flick of the wrist. Now he carves tigers in ivory, sells them for barely enough to feed himself. You buy one. Not out of pity, out of respect. It's exquisite. You don't haggle. Back home, you set it on your desk, next to the scroll weights. You wonder if he still trains. You wonder if any of you do. Your own side hustle is quieter. Once a month, after the moon sets, you copy old love letters for a merchant's daughter. Her family found a trove of them hidden behind a loose panel in an heirloom chest. She pays you not just to transcribe, but to make them more poetic. You write in perfect flowing brushwork. Even the moon, that most distant of lovers, waits each night to hear your breath. She thanks you with wrapped dumplings and coins folded in cloth. You don't feel ashamed. Not anymore. Historians still argue whether these extra vocations signaled the decay of the samurai class or the flexibility of its spirit. Whether moonlighting was treason to tradition or simply what survival looked like with a polished edge. You've made your peace with it, or mostly have. Your wife doesn't ask where the extra rice comes from, but she knows. Your daughter asked once why you come home with ink on your sleeves when it isn't a work day. You said, "I'm writing a story." She nodded. "Is it a true one?" You paused. "Not yet." You visit the temple that evening and leave an offering, not to a god, but to a stone statue of a fox tucked behind the azalea bush. It's a minor spirit. Forgotten mostly, but you like the look in its eyes. You whisper, "Thank you for keeping us clever." Then you go to your friend Utika's house. He was once a cavalry leader. Now he teaches boys how to read maps and polish saddles they'll never ride. You sit on his porch, sip plum wine. He says, "Do you remember when we thought we'd die in battle?" You nod. He laughs softly. "Instead, we're dying in increments, in ink." You clink cups. There's no bitterness in his voice, just weariness. Later, walking home, you see two boys practicing kendo with wooden swords in an alley. Their footwork is terrible. Their spirit is not. One of them looks up. "Are you a real samurai?" he asks. You glance down. Your sword is visible beneath your cloak. The netsuke in your pocket presses against your hip. You think about ledger forms, love letters, carved tigers. Then you say, "Yes." He beams. The next day, your old teacher sends a note asking if you'd consider helping with a lecture on ceremonial etiquette. He's too old to manage the full curriculum alone. You agree, not because it pays well, it doesn't, but because he once told you, "We are not measured by who we fight, but by what we carry forward." You begin teaching one afternoon a week. You explain bowing angles, scroll protocols, the correct order of sack presentation. It feels hollow at first. But one boy stays behind afterward. "Sensei," he asks, "do you think we'll ever need to use any of this?" You hesitate, then answer, "Only if we're very lucky or very lost." You return home to find your daughter asleep with an ink brush in her hand. She's been copying your old journal entries, the ones you thought were too obscure for a child to enjoy. One of them reads, "A broken sword can still reflect the moon." She's drawn a picture beneath it, a sword in two pieces and a moon floating just above. You feel something inside you tighten and then loosen. You write in your journal that night, "Maybe we aren't failing tradition. Maybe we're planting it in strange soil." You add, "My blade is dull from disuse, but my words, they're sharp as ever." You sleep well, because tomorrow you teach again. And maybe, just maybe, that's still a kind of battle. It's just past dawn when you hear the knock. Soft, measured, respectful. A messenger again. This time the scroll he hands you is unusually thick, stamped with the seal of your regional lord. You bow, close the gate quietly behind him, and retreat into the house. You sit, you break the seal, you begin to read. It's a directive. Another lecture series is being mandated across the province. The subject? Bushido, the way of the warrior. You stare at the title a long time. It's happening more and more. These official reinforcements of old ideals, public readings, school seminars, poetry contests, scroll distributions, all meant to breathe life back into the warrior spirit. But to you, it feels less like revival and more like taxidermy. They call it Bushido, but you barely recognize it anymore. Honor, courage, loyalty, self-sacrifice, all wonderful on paper, all admirable in stories. But in daily life, they've become theater, a fantasy, a set of manners dressed up in armor, rehearsed until it sounds like truth. You walk through the streets that day and notice the posters hanging near the town center. Uphold the way, reflect the ancestors, live the path. But the ink is still wet. The corners of the scroll are crisp, untouched. You nod to an old man sweeping his stoop. He nods back. Neither of you believes the poster means anything. Later, you attend one of the public readings. A young samurai, barely more than a boy, stands stiffly in front of the crowd and recites passages from a scroll you memorized as a teenager. His voice cracks once. He keeps going. The warrior devotes himself to loyalty and restraint. In stillness, there is power. In sacrifice, honor blooms. The townspeople listen politely. Some bow, some don't. A child yawns. The speaker bows and steps down. Everyone claps with the enthusiasm of people clapping for a tree. Historians still argue whether Bushido as we know it was an ancient code or a later invention, a kind of nostalgic balm for a warrior class with nothing left to fight. Some say it was once real. Others argue it was always more myth than method. Either way, it's now a brand, a slogan, a bedtime story for those who've never drawn blood but insist you polish your blade anyway. You think back to your youth, the fire in your chest, the way your instructor spoke of seppuku like it was a form of music, the drills, the cold mornings, the endless repetition. At the time you believed? Utterly. You believed you would need those values, that you would test your spirit against the edge of death. That Bushido would be the rope you clung to while everything burned. But nothing burned. Instead, the world softened. And Bushido turned into a performance, a scroll, a line on a stipend form, a topic for group recitation at mandatory gatherings. You don't hate it, not entirely. Some parts still feel solid. You do still believe in restraint, in dignity, in the quiet pride of knowing your limits. But the rest? It feels like a mask you have to keep gluing back on. That evening, you stop by the household of an old friend, a man who used to duel professionally. He's teaching sword forms to children now, with sticks. He offers you tea. You sit beneath the overhang and listen to cicadas buzzing. I got the directive too, he says. You raise an eyebrow. The Bushido one, he adds. I'm supposed to give a talk to the local magistrate's children. You nod. What will you say? He shrugs. Probably the same things I was told. Loyalty, self-control, discipline. A pause. Then he says, funny thing though, I don't think any of them want to be samurai. Why not? Because they don't see us doing anything. That hits harder than you expect. You walk home with his words rattling inside your head. You pass 3 guards polishing their armor on the front step, not for battle, for inspection. One adjusts a shoulder plate with surgical care, like a man shining his resume. You glance at your own reflection in a window. Do you still look like a warrior? Or just someone playing one? At home, your daughter is reading again. She's found an old book of parables. One of them is about a fox who trains to be a tiger, but forgets how to hunt. She looks up. Papa. Yes? Did you want to be a samurai? You pause. I thought I did. Do you still? Another pause. Then, some days. She nods. Okay. No judgment, just curiosity. You write in your journal that night. We wear Bushido like a haori, light, ceremonial, sleeved with memory. But sometimes I wonder if we're warming ourselves with fabric, not fire. And then you add, the way of the warrior has become the way of remembering we used to have one. You sleep lightly and dream of standing in a field with your sword drawn. But no enemy comes. Just scrolls. Just wind. Just your own shadow. It starts with silence. A courier arrives at dawn breathless, his sandals coated in dust. He doesn't speak, just bows low and hands you a folded notice. It's a thin one. Bad news is always concise. You break the seal. The local samurai, Hiroshi, has left this world in accordance with the old code. It was formal, ritualistic, and carried out before witnesses. You sit for a long moment, staring at the paper. The words don't quite land. Not yet. Hiroshi was quiet, polite, one of the better ones. He recited poetry with real affection. He made his own ink, grounded himself on rainy days. They say he was accused of disrespect, of failing to show the proper level of courtesy during a festival. A senior official took offense. A reprimand was issued. And another, a reassignment. Then, this. It escalated fast. It always does. Honor doesn't decay in inches. It collapses in silence. You fold the notice, tuck it into your sleeve, and go about your day with the same stiffness you always do. You nod at neighbors. You check records. You attend a meeting on river path maintenance. No one says a word about Hiroshi, but everyone knows. You've seen it happen before. A man pushed into a corner so tight, the only way out was through himself. They call it noble. They call it beautiful. You call it what it is, a man crushed by a system that worships the appearance of dignity while ignoring the absence of kindness. Historians still argue whether seppuku was truly honorable or just social coercion performed with a knife, whether it was self-control or social execution. You lean toward the latter because you knew Hiroshi, and he didn't want to die. He just couldn't find another way to stay. The funeral is closed, small, sparse. You watch from a distance as the smoke curls up from the incense altar. A single pine branch trembles in the wind. His sword lies on the offering mat, polished, untouched. You think of the last thing he said to you, something quiet, about the plum blossoms not blooming on time. He didn't look broken, but that's how shame works. It doesn't always show. You walk home that evening past the place where he used to sit during breaks. A stone bench near the garden wall. Someone has left a folded paper crane there. You don't know who. You sit. You stare at the crane. You think, what happens when a life becomes a test with no right answers? You write in your journal, he didn't fail Bushido. Bushido failed him. You think about all the ways you've almost cracked. The quiet dread that creeps in after a careless glance from a superior. The endless calculations of every word, every bow, every moment where dignity might fray and never stitch back together. You wonder, what if that were you? You imagine the room, the calm, the formality, the blade placed just so. The presence of witnesses to make sure it's clean. You imagine writing the death poem and realize you've been writing it line by line in your journal for years. But you're still here. Not because of strength necessarily, just resistance. You found other exits, quiet rebellions, little escapes. You remember the carved netsuke, the copied love letters, the long walks, the terrible, beautiful poems. You've survived by becoming porous, letting the shame move through you instead of staying trapped. Not everyone can. You speak with a junior retainer later that week. He seems off. Not visibly, just dimmer. You ask if he's all right. He hesitates, says, I bowed too late during a scroll presentation. It's been noted. You pause, then say, let me show you something. You walk him to your garden. You hand him your worst poem. He reads it, blinks. This is bad, he says. Yes, really bad. I know. He laughs, a little. Then he exhales like he's been holding his breath for a week. That's the moment. That's the crack in the wall that lets in air. You say, mistakes are survivable. They just don't want you to think that. He nods. He leaves a little lighter. You write in your journal, we are trained to fall with grace, but not to stand back up. You fold the corner of the page, just in case you need to come back to it later. That night you stare at the moon, full, aloof, unbothered. You think of Hiroshi again. You hope he's somewhere beyond shame now, beyond scripts, beyond silence. You whisper his name into the wind. Then you go inside and live another day he didn't get to. It's market day in town. The streets are busier than usual, the air full of the sharp scent of pickled radish and boiling soy, laughter rising over crates of persimmons. You walk slowly, hands tucked into your sleeves, observing, listening, and trying very hard not to glare at the merchant stalls. Because there they are, polished, confident, loud. The merchant class. They smile like nothing can touch them. Their robes are newer than yours, brighter, flashier. Some wear imported fabric. Others flash rings. One, you're not kidding, is wearing lacquered sandals with gold-threaded laces. Once they bowed when you passed, now they nod, or smirk, or, if they're especially bold, ignore you entirely. You feel heat in your stomach. It isn't just anger, it's hunger. For relevance, for respect. For a time when the sword on your hip meant more than the purse on their belt. You remember the stories your grandfather told. Merchants bowing so low their foreheads hit the dirt. Samurai walking down streets like waves through wheat. Now, they rent you rooms. They charge you interest. They sell your old swords as antiques to collectors. You stop at a rice stall and examine the sacks. The price has gone up. Again. You try not to wince. The merchant behind the stall eyes your sword, then says too sweetly, "We offer a discount for early payment. For everyone." You bow slightly. No words. You pay full price. Because anything less would be admitting weakness. You walk home with a smaller bag than you wanted. Your daughter won't say anything, but she'll notice. She always does. That night, you sit on your porch and watch the sun slide down behind the rooftops. You sip barley tea and think of all the times you've had to borrow, discreetly, cautiously, from the very people your ancestors were trained to scorn. You hate it. You also need it. You think about the old man in town who used to be a castle guard. He works as a night watchman for a shipping company now, owned by a merchant family. They treat him like a relic, but they pay him. Historians still argue whether the merchant class's rise was a natural evolution or a betrayal of the old world. Whether money was always destined to replace rank. Whether power, in the end, always follows the coin. You watch as one of the merchant's sons rides past on a horse far finer than any you've ever owned. He's laughing. His robe bears a crest designed last year. It means nothing, but it looks impressive. You remember when samurai wore armor into the capital. Now you can't afford socks without holes. One of your fellow retainers took a loan from a silk seller last spring. He couldn't repay it. Now he runs errands for them. Just until it's settled. He still wears his swords, but the younger merchants call him Sir Fetch-a-Lot. Not to his face. Not yet. You've considered borrowing too. You're late on your charcoal bill, and your sandals are splitting again. But you haven't. Not yet. Instead, you copy documents. You teach etiquette. You write poems for lovers who can't express themselves. You trade pride for rice. But not that kind of pride. Not the bone-deep, I am still a samurai pride. That you keep. Even if you have to wrap it in paper and tuck it behind your taxes. You write in your journal, "Once, merchants bowed at our feet. Now we stand in their debt. Our swords have become decorations, and their abacuses are sharper than our blades." You pause. Add, "They learned how to count. We forgot how to adapt." You sigh. Then you sketch a small drawing of a samurai sword being weighed against a coin. The coin is heavier. That night your daughter asks, "Why do we never go to the big tea shop anymore?" You smile. "Their tea isn't very good." She nods, believes you, for now. Later, your wife shows you a robe she's patched for the 4th time. "Maybe this winter we can have a new one made." You nod. Maybe. In spring. If the poetry pays. If the taxes don't rise. If the merchant doesn't raise his prices again. You stare at your sword. Then at your ledger. Then back again. and wonder when exactly the world decided the pen truly was mightier. Retirement is a word that rolls softly in your ears now, like a distant drum too far to fear, but not too far to hear. You know it's coming. Not today, not this week, but soon enough. You've already started getting the little signs. You're no longer the first picked for ceremonial duties. You're no longer invited to the poetry readings unless someone forgets to say no. Even your assigned paperwork is quieter, less urgent, less involved. No more patrols, no more strategic duties, just logs, letters, attendance rosters. They say this is respect, a gentle tapering, a dignified easing away from duty. But what it feels like is erasure in slow motion. You remember how they handled your old friend Katsuro, a fierce swordsman in his prime, respected, precise, feared even. When he turned 52, they gave him a scroll of appreciation and reassigned him to a seat near the back of the record hall. After 3 months, no one asked for his advice anymore. After 6, they forgot to send him the annual report summary. He took up gardening, grew chrysanthemums in perfect rows, but his hands never stopped twitching like they missed the weight of a hilt. He still bows when you see him. You bow lower, because you know. You're seeing it now in yourself, the quiet shrinking, the narrowing of your world. Your knees creak when you kneel for too long. Your left hand doesn't hold the brush as steady as it once did. The calligraphy you once executed with pride now bears the tiniest tremors, barely visible, but you feel them. You feel them. You've started waking earlier than usual, not out of duty, but out of uncertainty. What will happen when the duty is gone? Who are you without tasks to define you? Historians still argue whether samurai retirement was an honor or a prison, whether stepping back from service was a reward for loyalty, or a polite way to disappear someone whose time had passed. You lean toward the latter, because in your world, you don't retire. You fade. You become the background to a scroll no one reads anymore. The system is polite, of course, always polite. They call it honorable withdrawal thanat. They say, your wisdom will guide the next generation. They bow as they say it. And then they stop including you in meetings. You've seen samurai who couldn't handle it. One spent every morning polishing his sword until it glowed, not out of vanity, but desperation. Another started writing letters to himself from imaginary officials, just to feel needed. Another simply stopped speaking, sat under a pine tree until he forgot the words. You're trying to do better. You've started mentoring a boy from the outer province. His name is Sota. He's bright, eager, terrible with a bow, decent with etiquette. He asks questions you don't always have answers to. But you like him. You tell him things no one told you, like how shame can be survived, how sometimes the proper bow isn't the one that saves face, but the one that offers grace. He listens, writes notes. You hope he remembers. You write in your journal, I was trained for war, then assigned to stillness. Now I'm being prepared for silence. You add, if I must vanish, let it be with usefulness, not regret. Your wife notices the shift too. She watches you linger over your morning tea, watches you rearrange your scrolls more than necessary. You could stop, she says once softly. Stop what? Trying to matter so much. You don't reply, not because she's wrong, but because you don't know how. Because in this life, you weren't taught how to be. You were taught how to serve. And when service ends, what's left? Your daughter, now older, has begun training in the fine arts, painting, music, the subtle forms of the brush. She's good. Really good. Her teachers whisper about promise. You pretend to be surprised. One night, She plays a soft tune on the koto, unaware that you're listening. You sit just outside the door, eyes closed. And for the first time in weeks, your thoughts stop chasing themselves. You write, "If I cannot carry a sword, let me carry quiet." Then you fold the page. You begin clearing space in the study. Not because anyone asked you to, but because you want to leave it clean. You begin sorting your scrolls, notes, journals, poems. You leave some for soda. Others you tuck away in cloth. A few you burn. Quietly. With incense. You keep the netsuke on your desk. A small carving of a tiger. Fierce, still. Watching. You're not done yet. But you're beginning to walk slower. And you're learning how to bow to absence with dignity. Because in this life, there is no retirement party, no farewell parade, only the soft rearranging of duties, the passing of keys, and the folding of robes. You place your sword on the rack one evening and whisper to it, "When they forget me, I will still remember you." And then you sleep, not fully at peace, but quietly enough to dream. There's a new rule. They posted it yesterday. Neat calligraphy on clean paper, framed and mounted near the northern gate of the estate. It reads, "Display of swords in public to be minimized unless required by ceremonial protocol." You stare at it for a long time. The wording is careful, polite. It doesn't ban swords, just discourages them. The guards whisper about it. A few scoff. Others nod, as if it's inevitable. One of the younger retainers jokes, "Maybe next, they'll ask us to trade our blades for umbrellas." No one laughs, because it isn't funny. It's the future, and it's not wearing armor. You walk the estate grounds that morning and count the changes. The banners are smaller now. The calligraphy contests outnumber the archery displays. Even the training yards echo more with paper shuffling than grunts of exertion. A young scribe rushes past you, nearly trips, then bows apologetically. You look down and realize he's carrying a ledger marked "Promotions." You don't recognize a single name on the cover. You keep walking. In the tea house, they've added a shelf of imported books, philosophers from other lands, soft leather covers. The samurai who used to host wrestling bouts here now holds philosophical salons. He greets you with a smile and offers you a seat. You decline. Not today. Outside, the wind picks up, rustling the pines like ghosts in conversation. You find a bench and sit. The same one you used to patrol past daily, back when posture and pace mattered more than paper. You close your eyes. Try to remember the feeling of your sword being more than ceremonial. Not a symbol, a tool, a companion, something with weight, in your hands and in the world. But that feeling is fading. Historians still argue whether the end of the samurai era was a slow erosion or a sharp, deliberate dismantling, whether the warrior class crumbled under its own rigidity or was swept aside by forces too modern to resist. You don't know the answer. You just know what it feels like to live through the last pages of a story no one wants to read aloud anymore. You visit the armory that evening. It's quiet. The racks are dustier than they should be. A few blades remain, wrapped in velvet, untouched for years. You find yours. Run your hand over the hilt. It still fits, but it feels more like a memory than a weapon. You write in your journal, "They didn't take the sword. They just stopped giving it meaning." And beneath that, emptiness wears many names. Lately, it answers to ceremony. You return home after dark. Your wife is mending a robe. She looks up, then down, then quietly says, "They posted the notice." You nod. She asks, "Will you stop wearing it?" You look at the blade, then at her. "No," you say. Not yet? She doesn't argue. Instead, she hands you a folded cloth. For the handle, she says. The silk is fraying. You take it. You wrap the hilt again. Carefully, tenderly, like binding a wound that will never quite heal. Later, your daughter finds you outside, staring at the stars. She sits beside you. Will I learn the sword, she asks. You pause. You can, you say, but it won't be required. She thinks about that. Is that good or bad? You look at her, young, curious, unbroken by ceremony. I don't know yet, you say. Maybe both. She nods. That's enough. Before bed, you take one last walk through the garden. The lanterns are lit, the paths swept. Somewhere in the distance, someone plays a flute, low, meandering, soft as moonlight. You bow to the pine tree by the gate, not out of ritual, out of memory, out of gratitude, out of mourning. You write in your journal, we were taught to be stone, but stone wears down too, and sometimes it leaves behind shapes more honest than monuments. You close the book and place it next to your sword. You no longer need to carry them both every day, but you will carry what they meant. And for tonight, that's enough. The candle burns low. Its light softens the room until everything looks painted. Your desk, your sword rack, the quiet folds of your robe. Even the ink on your fingers seems gentler now, like a shadow remembering how to rest. You set down the brush. You exhale. It's been a long story, hasn't it? But not the kind told with drums and fire. Not a tale of great wars or famous last stands. This one was slower, quieter, made of glances, of silences, of choices no one will ever write down. The story of what happens after the legends end. The slow unwinding of a class, a code, a way of being, the sound of swords growing still, the sound of people trying to remember how to live without them. You've walked through fading castles and shrinking paybooks, through tea rituals and tax ledgers. You've seen honor bend and formality crack. You've bowed 100 times in rooms that felt colder each year. You've carried the weight of a name and found ways, gently, not to be crushed by it. It's strange, isn't it? How history isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the feeling of waking up a little earlier than you used to, or watching your daughter fall asleep without asking what tomorrow holds, or realizing that your sword no longer frightens anyone, and that maybe that's not a failure. Maybe that's change. You lean back now, letting the candlelight stretch long across the floor. Outside, a wind stirs the bamboo. Soft, steady, reassuring. The kind of wind that says nothing urgent is chasing you. You close your eyes. Let your shoulders drop. Let the silence swell without apology. Let go of the need to prove anything tonight. You've been so many things. Warrior, clerk, poet, father. Some of it felt heavy. Some of it didn't fit. But you wore it all with care. You tried. You endured. And that's enough. For tonight, there are no more forms to fill, no expectations to meet, no one to impress. Just breath and rest, and maybe a dream waiting just past the threshold, one where the past is a garden, not a grave, where you are not forgotten, where no one is. So sleep now. You've earned it. You always have.